All right, my young humanities friends, we need to jump into our study of ecology. This unit corresponds with chapter 3 in your textbook. In case you need a reference, so refer to chapter 3 for this material. In this unit, we're going to be looking at some really broad ideas about what ecology is, what ecosystems are, energy relationships within ecosystems, and so on. So some pretty broad concepts about ecosystems, basically. So let's start with a definition of ecology. Scientific study of interactions among organisms, so among all the foxes and squirrels and trees and birds and so on, all the different organisms, how they interact with each other, but also not just the organisms, but also their environment, the non-living components of where they live, the water, the light, the temperatures and so on, and the impact of those factors on the organisms, okay? And the impact of the organisms on their environment as well. So that's what we're looking at. Ecology is all about relationships and interactions between organisms and their environment and each other. It's an extraordinarily complex topic. You're talking about a lot of moving parts there. Now, we just need some general terminology. The biosphere, which I believe we've already touched on as part of your introductory material, parts of the planet on which in which life exists, including the land, the water, the air. All of these parts of the planet support life, and so all of that life in all of these parts of the planet is referred to as the biosphere. Okay? Now, we've touched on this levels of organization. We did that as part of our introductory material. I do want you to focus now, though, on the levels of organization of life that deal with ecology. So the smallest we're going to get in terms of ecology is the individual level. Okay? So the individual is the main unit when we're talking about ecology. We've already talked about how the main unit of life is the cell. But when we're talking the study of ecology, we usually don't get much smaller than one organism. Okay? Now, if you have a bunch of different organisms, a bunch of individuals of the same species, for example, these elk here, or moose, or whatever they are, I guess that's an elk, then if you have a bunch of them that are interacting together, you would have a population, okay? And then if you've got not only the elk, but also the owls and the moose and the trees and the so on that you're considering, then you're talking the community level, all the different species in an area. And then if you're talking about not only all those different species, but also the non-living parts of the area in which we live, then you have brought your level of study up to the ecosystem level. And then if you're talking about a very broad area of ecosystems that are generally similar, they share a same climate, same general types of organisms, you're talking a biome, for example, tundra, taiga, temperate deciduous forest where we live, and things of that nature. And then, of course, the biggest, broadest example level of organization is the biosphere itself. So we are going from most specific to most broad, and from a simpler level of organization, although certainly individuals are far from simple, to the most complex, encompassing the greatest number of parts. Okay? Now, let's make sure we know what this term means. And again, I think we touched on it already in class once. A species is basically a type of organism, or a category of organisms, or however you want to think of it. But these organisms are similar to each other. They look similar. But most importantly, they can and do interbreed with each other. They can have babies with each other. And those babies are also fertile, meaning their babies can have babies. Okay? So, for example, Bald eagles are a species of bird. Bald eagles can mate with other bald eagles and have babies that can also make more bald eagles, okay? And they can't do that with any other type of bird or any other type of organism for that matter, okay? So that's what a species is, and we will talk much more about that later, but for right now, it's a type of organism that can interbreed with others of its type successfully, okay? Now, a population is a group of the same species that lives in a particular area. So, all the bald eagles that live along the James River near Richmond might be a population of bald eagles, and they would interact with each other, compete with each other for food and nesting sites, interact with each other for breeding purposes, and so on. More so than they would any bald eagles from outside of that area. Okay, so a community then would be all the different populations that live together in a particular area. So the bald eagles along the James River is one population, but there's also ospreys that live along the James River, and there's also gray squirrels that live along the James River, and there's also long-nosed garfish that live in the James River, and red fox that live along the James River, and sycamore trees that live along the James River. And all of these different species interact with each other. The osprey might prey on the garfish, and the eagle will compete with the osprey for that fish, and the sycamore trees provide habitat for the squirrel and the fox, and so on. So all of these organisms interact with each other and thus make this complex community, okay? And an ecosystem, we've talked about that. Now we're talking about all the living and the non-living or physical components of the environment. So words that you should recognize: biotic factors are simply the living parts of an ecosystem. And so biotic factors might include the trees, the bird, the man, whatever in this picture. While abiotic factors are the non-living parts of the ecosystem, the water, the rock, the air, things of that nature. Both incredibly important. You can't. They both are incredibly important. Though in biology we tend to overwhelmingly focus on the biotic factors, the abiotic factors absolutely affect what kind of life can be in an area. Okay, and we've got this term biome, okay, a group of ecosystems that have the same climate and thus have similar communities of organisms. For example, a temperate deciduous forest is going to, by and large, be the same here as it might be elsewhere in the world. Might be some slightly different things, but similar kinds of climate produce similar kinds of plants and animals. A desert, again, has similar water-tolerant types of drought-tolerant types of organisms, and so on. A marine environment is going to have, again, organisms that we associate with that type of environment, a salt-tolerant organisms and things like that. Okay? Biosphere, highest level of organization, most complex, and the living part of planet Earth. Okay? Now, methods of doing ecological research. When people do ecological studies, they may do these simply by observing long-term field studies, just recording what they see, perhaps rainfall amounts and effects of that on population numbers over a long period of time, or whatever. So they may just observe. They may actually conduct experiments, maybe controlling certain variables and testing to see if one variable affects tree height or population numbers in an area or something. So we may actually conduct an experiment. Or if the phenomenon you want to study is so large or occurs over such a long period of time that an actual experiment or actual observation is impractical, oftentimes scientists use modeling activities, often now computer modeling, to determine the effects of different climate patterns on ecosystems and things like that. So all of these are certainly valid ways to do research. Our focus will be probably, we'll do probably all three of these in class, actually. We'll do some modeling of things, and we'll observe things and do some experimentation. Okay. Now, our first major topic, other than just laying out the organization of life from the individual on up to the biosphere, energy flow in ecosystems. Really important topic, okay? The ultimate source of energy, at least for the ecosystem where we hang out and where we have most experience, is the sun. The amount of the sun's energy that gets captured and used by living things is probably less than 1% of the sun's total energy. So the sun has an enormous amount of energy, and our life on Earth is capturing just a little bit of that. But wow, what a result from that, just that very small amount of sunlight that it's actually catching. Now, there are some organisms that do not rely on sunlight either directly or indirectly. These organisms, if you will recall from previous years, perhaps in life science or wherever you might have talked about this before, organisms that rely on light are photosynthesizers, so they're doing photosynthesis. And many of us heterotrophs on land are surviving off of the organisms by eating them, off the organisms that do photosynthesis. But there are some entire ecosystems that do not have light as the foundation of that ecosystem. And instead, they use chemicals that are produced by the earth, inorganic compounds, and we'll talk some more about that in a minute, and the energy contained within those as a substitute for sunlight. Okay? And most of the places where we find such organisms are in and around mineral springs, hot springs, and deep sea vents down in the very depths of the ocean where chemicals from the molten earth are coming up through these deep sea vents, and whole colonies of creatures that were unknown to humans not all that long ago have been found living with these chemicals as the foundation of the energy source, not sunlight, as the deep sea is way too deep for sunlight to even penetrate. So, we'll talk some more about that. But if we're going to talk about energy flow, we need to first talk about what energy is. So energy, if you might recall from a physical science class or other science class, is the ability simply to do work, the ability to do activities. To do work is energy. In the case of living things, you gotta have energy to do all of life, the life processes that living things must do to get food, to make food, to respond to stimulus, to maintain homeostasis, which is so hugely important. All of that requires energy. The minute you stop having energy in your body is the minute you stop maintaining homeostasis, which is the minute that your body systems go out of whack and you're dead. So there are a couple of types of energy. Kinetic energy, which is the energy of motion. Light energy is an example of kinetic energy. Mechanical energy, like the energy used to run or to write as you're writing your notes now or whatever. Both of those types of energy are energies of motion. Light energy is moving in waves through the atmosphere or through space. And of course, mechanical energy is moving physical objects. Okay? The other major type of energy, so kinetic and potential energy, which is energy that is stored and is not being used but may be used later on. For example, there is a lot of stored energy in this food right here. In this sandwich, there's energy stored in the bread, in the plant material, the lettuce, the meat, all kinds of energy stored in the form of chemical bonds that are in the chemical compounds making up this food. Remember, everything on Earth is made up of molecules and atoms, and when those molecules and atoms are put together, if we break them apart, we can get energy out of them. This is storing chemical energy. Okay? And that's what we really need to think about in terms of life and energy forms that are useful to life. The chemical energy is enormously useful, as is light and mechanical energy. Okay? Now, we're going to talk about some different types of energy, ways of getting energy. Let me rephrase that. Ways of getting food energy into our bodies, chemical energy into our bodies. Autotrophs get chemical energy into their bodies by capturing energy and then using that energy to make food. Okay? For example, energy from sunlight is used by photosynthesizers to make food, to make sugar. Okay? But, as we already mentioned, energy from inorganic compounds is captured by chemosynthesizers and is used to make food as well, like organisms that might be near a mineral spring or near those deep sea vents. Either way, captured energy is used to assemble little molecules into big complex molecules. For example, sunlight is energy that is going to be used to put together little building blocks of CO2 and water to give us, glucose sugar, which is a much larger, more complicated chemical. So, basically keep in mind, autotrophs are using energy to take little building blocks and build them into a tower of a complex molecule we call glucose, okay? And you can think of it as a little kid taking Legos and building a tower, okay? That's what photosynthesizers are doing. And so once they get their tower, their glucose molecule, then they can take that and break it down and get energy out of it, okay? So, autotrophs are also called producers because they are the foundation of the food web on planet Earth. They are the ones that harness that sunlight, or if they're a chemosynthesizer, the inorganic compounds produced by the Earth. But let's just focus on the sunlight for a second. Producers take in the sunlight, convert it to food, and then everything else can get at that energy because everything else can either eat the plants or eat the animals that eat the plants. Okay? So, I'm going to pause there because as we talk about these organic and inorganic compounds, we do need to have a little mini chemistry lesson. So I'm going to pause here and then we're going to come back and do our little mini chemistry lesson and then we'll move on. All right. Thanks for watching. I will catch you in the next podcast.